Hello, and welcome to Mr. America, the Bearded Truth, covering political and social issues one liberty at a time, with entertaining. Hello, and welcome to Mr. America, the Bearded Truth, covering political and social issues one liberty at a time, with entertaining insights of current events and important discussions on topics that affect us all, shining the torch of liberty and brightening the future by bringing libertarianism into our everyday life. And now, your host, the friendly neighborhood libertarian, Jason Lyon, Mr. America, the Bearded Truth on Muddied Waters Media.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Oh my goodness, it's a whole new year. We're here. I'm so excited. It is Friday, January 6th. We're here in the brand new year, 2023, and I'm so excited for today. So just yesterday, the South Carolina Supreme Court heard oral arguments governing over the death penalty here in South Carolina. And so, I had to take this opportunity. I've got with me an incredible woman. Her name is Reverend Hillary Taylor. She is the interim executive director for South Carolinians for the alternative to the death penalty. And so today we're going to be discussing just that. But before we get into all of that, of course, we got to talk about the thank yous. Thank you to each and every one of you guys for being a part of today's show. This is, of course, a Muddy Waters Media production where we talk about all the things liberty. We talk about all the freedoms. We talk about all the good things and some of the bad things. Today, we are, of course, talking about the death penalty, something that we would like to see an end to. I'm so excited for this. So thank you to each and every one of you for being a part of this show, for sharing this out, for liking the show, for dropping your comments, liking other people's comments, just interacting with one another and helping build us back into the algorithm. We love you and appreciate each and every one of you guys. So thank you guys so much for that. I want to give a big shout out and a thank you to Jenny and Brian Scott Lambrick for the intro music that we use on this show and every episode of Mr. America, the Bearded Truth. I want to give a thank you to each and every one of our sponsors over there at, of course, that's anchor.fm/Muddy/subscribe for just a low price of $10 a month. You too can be a part of the exclusive group, getting some of the exclusive content, getting the video podcast wherever, however you would like it on all of your favorite podcast apps, including Spotify. And a big, huge, massive shout out to, didn't have that one up ready, Kelsey Line Designs. If you guys are looking for a new logo, new branding for your business, publications, business cards, looking to help out with your social medias, head on over to kelseylinedesigns.com. Use the code Mr. Bearded Truth. She's going to hook you up with a nice discount. But this is somebody who is being heavily sought after across this nation, in all the different states. So many great figures that you guys are all know and love, such as Spike Cohen, Natalie Bruno, Joe Jorgensen from the 2020 race, Ashley Shade up north. You've got potentially some 2024 presidential candidates clamoring for her. But there are so many people across this country that I can't even name them all. But so many of the guests we've had on have already used Kelsey Line. So head on over, kelseylinedesigns.com. Use the code Mr. Bearded Truth, and she'll hook you up with a discount. Also want to give a big shout out and a thank you to Liberty Chic, liberty-chic.com, libertychic.com. Dwayne Lester is the man over there teaching all of us across the nation about better ways of engaging on the political front, teaching us how to talk to one another without starting a political fight, how to grow and develop with each other. And now he's got Liberty Chic, which is where you could take the fun little terms that all of us libertarians love to use, taxation is theft, and put it on your seasonal decorations, put it on your walls, put it on your cars and your vinyls and what have you. libertychic.com is going to have the stuff that you need in order to take your libertarianism to the next level. But without further ado, I do want to welcome my wonderful, incredible guest for this evening, Miss Reverend Hillary Taylor. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing well, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on the show tonight. It is a true pleasure. I'm extremely privileged.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So it's one of those things, like, I feel like when I talk to people and they're like, Jason, you do a podcast, you're engaged with politics, you must love this stuff. And it's like, no, I hate this stuff. I want to be retired. I never want to talk about this stuff again. I'm sure that you're kind of, for the SCADP, that's kind of where you're sitting at too. I don't want to do this anymore. But it's a pleasure of mine to be here, sitting here and talk with you about how we can, change the world and at least here in South Carolina, make the world a better place. But I think the first thing that we have to start with is, who are you and where'd you come from and how do we get to today?
Yeah, that is a big, expansive question. So, a little bit about me. As you've mentioned, I'm a reverend. I'm an ordained United Methodist minister belonging to the Mountain Sky Conference. That's the conference that includes Wyoming and Colorado, and a couple of other states. But I'm actually originally from here in South Carolina. I grew up in Columbia. I graduated from Hammond School. I went to Furman University for college. I graduated after studying psychology as my major. And then I became a young adult missionary with the United Methodist Church and spent a year and a half in South Africa working for the Methodist Church of Southern Africa's seminary, which is the one seminary they have, and it feeds like 6 different countries, which is pretty humbling. It's one of the most diverse places in South Africa. And I was super privileged to help connect seminarians to their field education placements. And so I got to work with the classroom and also with people out in the field as they tied hospice work to their studies of development and theology, as they worked with kids who had some profound physical and developmental disabilities. And, what does that mean for God's grace if you can't understand, words, for example? So really powerful stuff. And also a wrestling, obviously, with a lot of historical pieces that kind of resonated with me as a South Carolinian. So it was a way for me to pick the brains of lots of fantastic people who have lots of different views and different life experiences from mine. And then I came back and I lived in Miami, Florida for a bit, for the second half of my young adult service project. And I was a financial coach with people who were asset limited and income constrained, but also employed, right? So these are people who are trying to work themselves out of poverty, but just can't quite get to the next level. And so I would help them. Yeah, no, it's awful, right? So I would help them figure out a savings plan. I would help them design budgets. I would help look at their credit reports and, dispute different, fraud claims, where people would try to rip them off and charge them money, or maybe they had bad credit and they're trying to buy a house now, right? But this credit charge, is holding them back. Help them settle those charges, and that way they could qualify. And it was really amazing to see the difference that just settling something for half of what the debt was, just improved people's credit and just allowed them to fulfill their hopes and their dreams for their family, help them get new jobs, all that stuff.
Wow.
And then so that's just my first 25 years, right? So the short end of the next part of what I'm going to tell you is I went to seminary at Candler School of Theology, which is a part of Emory University. And that's where I actually began engaging with anti-death penalty work. And we can get back to that in a minute. And then I went on to pastor 2 churches in rural South Carolina, and then did some hospital chaplaincy. And now I'm working as the interim executive director for SCADP. So pretty excited to be doing this work, even though I am also trying to work myself out of a job. So there's that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's so amazing because as you were talking about your life story, you hit on so many things that we talk about so much on the show of it's great to tell people pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but so many people they never had a mentor, they never had a teacher, they never had a figure in their lives that could teach them how to navigate through those things. And so it was you could tell them to grab themselves by their metaphorical bootstraps all you want all day, but it's until you have somebody there to help them through those processes. Learning as an adult right now, I'm early 30s and I'm learning things still to this day from my in-laws, and they're you don't learn this stuff. I'm I didn't learn that stuff until you showed me. And that's okay, but it's being out there and just helping people, and that's what we've been all about. So that's incredible to hear you've got that background before we even, of course, dive into the SCADP, the South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. So that's I'm flabbergasted to be in your presence just from the life that you've lived to that point. So I've got in your bio that you started off for Kelly Gissendaner.
Gissendaner, yes.
There we
Kelly
go.
Gissendaner is her name.
Back in 2015, you were fighting for clemency for her, and ultimately you weren't successful. But I'm sure that there was a lot that you learned there, and there's something that we face in the political arena, and that's that we're not going to be successful every time, even when we're right, even when we've got the best things. But overcoming those things is something that we all have to come through, and we have to keep the fight going. So you've taken what you learned from that, and now you're bringing this to South Carolina as the interim executive director. So what's the skinny for SCADP now? Like, where are we at? Tell me a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, so SCADP has been around for around 40 years, a little bit more, under different names. We've been known as South Carolinians Against the Death Penalty, South Carolinians Abolishing the Death Penalty. At about 2011, we sort of went dormant as an organization. And at that time, we were known as South Carolinians Abolishing the Death Penalty. We sort of became reinvigorated. We restarted in 2021 with the passage of the firing squad bill here in South Carolina. For those of you who are not aware, in 2021, Senate Bill 200 passed. And this was a bill that at first said that, okay, well, we're not able to get lethal injection drugs as a state. The Department of Corrections, for whatever reason, has not been able to get these drugs. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the electric chair the default method of execution here in South Carolina. And then that made its way through the legislature, and there were some legislators who said, no, like the electric chair is too harsh. It's too inhumane. What we should do is we should have like a choice. We need another alternative. Let's have the firing squad. That's an alternative. That's a better thing than just the electric chair. We're going to give them a choice. That's humane. So that amendment was made to that bill, and the bill passed. And so what we have now in South Carolina are three methods of execution. We have lethal injection, which is what every person on death row has chosen to be their method of execution. We have the electric chair, which has been in existence since 1912, and I believe the last time it was worked on was the 1980s, which is horrifying for lots of reasons.
Yes.
And there are many other reasons why the electric chair is horrifying. But now we have the firing squad, and this is a mechanism where there are three people who would be, shrouded and behind a wall, and somebody would be the person who is on death row, who's going to be executed, would be 15 feet away, and there's a special type of bullet that has been chosen to be in two of the three guns. Because we need some kind of way for people to say, oh, it's not me, to maybe prevent against moral injury. Whether or not that's the case, we're not entirely sure. But then essentially what happens is people aim for the heart and aim to blow up the heart, basically. And that is the way that people will be dying if they have to choose between the electric chair and the firing squad, since lethal injection is not possible right now.
It's flabbergasting. It like just gives me such turmoil because like we talk about gun safety on this program a lot. We talk about, gun defense and everything else. You have people that have to use, in dire circumstances, they have to use a gun in order to defend themselves, their family, and their property. And how many of those people are traumatized? And so you have three people that the state is ordering that you now have to go ahead and execute somebody else in a way that is inherently going to be traumatic. And they're going to have, as you said, they're trying to fight through that moral dilemma there. But these are things that you just can't get away from, right? We see this with military veterans all the time. We talk about 22 veterans per day killing themselves. We talk about, just the traumatic experiences of seeing somebody else be killed, seeing people suffer and everything else. And hopefully the idea is that through the firing squad and the way that it would go is that there wouldn't be suffering going along with it. It would be an instantaneous killing. But I can't imagine that this is the way that would roll out. And if I remember correctly, it's been quite a long time since that was a normal process for executing anyone. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from like where they got this idea from. You can kind of see like they were grasping at straws because they were like, we have to have another choice. We can't get here in South Carolina. They have not been able to, as you said, they're not able to get the drugs to be able to administer those. There's a huge dilemma there that, you know, we have to have doctors to be able to verify that these are the right drugs, but the doctors will not actually administer the drugs. So you have just random Joe Schmoes providing these things because the Hippocratic Oath is something that those doctors are going to rightfully uphold. But there's no good method currently for them to be able to provide these services of executing people. But there's so much more to this conversation, of course. But so you've brought us up to today with where we're at with the death penalty.
Well, and actually, I brought you up to 2021. That's what it is.
Yes.
So in 2021, we were reformed, and we changed our name to South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, with the idea that, you know, it's one thing to be against the death penalty, it's one thing to be, you know, seeking to abolish the death penalty, but if we're not actually seeking to build a better system or get other people involved in our fight so that we can build a better system together of sentencing, then all of this is for naught, and we might just end up recreating the system that we very much were trying to destroy. So South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty officially formed in June of 2021, and we have been working ever since to recruit voices to work against the death penalty. Our goal is to abolish the death penalty and to catalyze criminal justice reform through public advocacy, through grassroots organizing, and through community mobilization. And so we're seeking to, you know, rehumanize the people who are on death row and sort of remind everybody. I come at this from a theological standpoint. Not everybody does, but you don't necessarily need to think theologically to believe that nobody's more than the worst thing we've ever done, and we are more than the worst thing that's ever happened to us. And nobody's beyond redemption, right? So this is what our work speaks to, is that the person who has been a part of violent crime beforehand, you know, at some point in the past, is not necessarily the person who they are, you know, 5 years from that moment, 10 years from that moment, 20 years from that moment. And we seek to make sure that happens, and that those conversations happen, and that people are reconnected to their humanity, and that others are able to see that. And then what we do is we also educate people in you know, individual meetings and community spaces about the realities of the death penalty. We gather power and influence with those voices that we're able to educate, and then we, you know, ideally we will end the death penalty by, you know, through legislative reform that outlaws it, so that we can focus on alternatives, because we believe that any alternative to the death penalty is better than the death penalty, and we can get into more of that as our conversation continues tonight.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the thing. You were talking about like how people aren't the same as they are 5, 10, 20 years later. And one of the most influential quotes I've ever heard was, I was sitting with a man who was in his 60s. And the quote was, you shouldn't judge a man by his worst days for the rest of his days. And it just made me pause and think about, you know, how our society has treated these labels and everything else of, you know, somebody's a felon. They're a felon for life, whether they've paid their dues and they spent their time in prison and they've gone through the system and everything else. You know, they're a drunkard, they're an addict, they're, you know, they're homeless, they're this, that, and the other. And it's just like these labels are somehow just, we carry it with people. And it's just like we take the worst judgment of somebody on their worst day, and that we just apply it to them. They can never be greater than that. And so this is one of those things that, you know, there's so much common ground across the entire political spectrum, across all of our communities, where we're like, you know, people can be better. And I think for a lot of people, we have to break down that tribalism. We have to break down that idea of my team can be better, but your team can't, and everything else. And so that's, exactly what you're saying with that good grassroots community and that community engagement, we can start working towards that. Get rid of the punitive system that we have today and have a rehabilitative system, a system that touches each and every heart that comes through the justice system to help restore victims, to help bring back dignity and value, so that to those who are offending, so that they can go back into, when they come back into society, which most people do, but of course we're talking about the exceptions to that rule, but when they come back into community, they can bring dignity and value back to their communities, and they can stand up on their own, and then we can also work on the righting the wrongs of what's been committed and finding ways through that. But when we talk about the death penalty itself, this is a practice that I think that we can have like a 16-hour podcast on, but I'm not gonna kill the audience with this. But when it comes to the death penalty, this is the end all be all. There's no going back on this. National average is about 1 out of 9 people who are executed are later found to be exonerated. We have somebody who was on death row here, and we both share from the upstate of South Carolina. We both share a city where, Murder, Etc., a podcast that I would recommend everyone to go check out, of a man back in 1975 being put on death row for a crime he was not even around when it was committed. But because it was an officer being killed, they found a young black male, and they said he did it. They got the media in on it. They got journalists in on it. And then I'm not going to spoil the whole show for you guys or the whole podcast, but listen to Murder, Etc. This happens here. So this shouldn't be the end all be all for anything when there is that error, the error rate that we've had so far. But so we've brought it up to kind of close to where we are today. We've gone through 2021, leading up to where we are today after yesterday in the Supreme Court. Is there a chance you could fill us in on kind of the grounds laying up to the Supreme Court case yesterday and kind of where we're at today?
Yeah, so essentially what happened is when the firing squad bill passed in 2021, there was a lawsuit filed by the lawyers who represent people on death row. And there were a couple of different people who were a part of that case who are currently on death row, one of them being Richard Moore. But there are several others. And this is a case that is challenging. At first, there was a challenge of, well, how can we make people pick the firing squad when we don't actually have a firing squad mechanism? And so what happened is between June of 2021 and March/April of 2022, really March, the state of South Carolina spent $53,000 approximately refurbishing a room that is now perfect, or adequate for a firing squad procedure. And what burns me up is that is the cost of the average teacher's salary in South Carolina. And we spent it on refurbishing one room in the Department of Corrections, and a room that is going to be used to kill people in, right? We didn't use it for life-giving means or sort of state betterment means. We used it in what I would call is just a really wasteful and unimaginative way. So that is one part of that journey. So then come March, April of 2022, and what happens is there's another lawsuit filed, another court proceeding filed that says, is the firing squad even constitutional according to the South Carolina state constitution? And so what happens is last year, again, in August, there was a court case in the Richland County Circuit Court between Justice 360, the law firm representing several men who were on death row, a part of this case, and then the Department of Corrections, and specifically Brian Sterling. The case is called Owens v. Sterling, if anybody wants to look it up. So that court case happens, And in September 2022, we learn that Judge Jocelyn Newman, who is the judge over that particular court case, she calls both the firing squad and the electric chair cruel and unusual and corporal based on all of the evidence that was gathered by the folks on the side of Justice 360. And she also had issue with the way that the state kept saying that lethal injection drugs are unavailable. They didn't really qualify that. They didn't really say why they were unavailable or what steps had been taken to try and make them available. And so what she did is she effectively put a stay on executions permanently because the state could not use the firing squad or the electric chair. The state promptly appealed the circuit court's decision. And yesterday, the Supreme Court of South Carolina heard the appeal. And they had a number of different questions and seemed to take very seriously the idea of the firing squad and the electric chair being used. So that is something that the lawyers noted. And they had lots and lots of questions, again, for why the state could not procure lethal injection drugs. And they also wanted to ask both sides, what does it mean for capital punishment, or for something to be cruel and unusual and corporal, which if something is all three of those things, we have the Eighth Amendment here in the United States, which is against cruel and unusual punishment, right? And so here in South Carolina, the emphasis is on cruel and unusual and corporal. And so, they wanted definitions for both of those things. And so there are a couple of realities, a couple of possibilities from the court case yesterday. A, we don't know when the court is going to make its decision. And B, we are not sure about whether the court is going to strike down the circuit court's judgment and say, we believe that the firing squad and the electric chair are constitutional. We don't know whether the Supreme Court is going to say, you know what, we're going to throw this back to the circuit court because there's still a couple of questions that need to be answered around what does it mean to be available? What were these questions about cruel and unusual and corporal? So again, throwing it back to the circuit court. And then three, another possibility, and this is something that SCADP would really, really like, is that the Supreme Court could say, you know what, we are going to uphold the circuit court's decision. We are going to put a permanent stay on executions by firing squad and by the electric chair because they are unconstitutional according to our state constitution. So we clearly know what we would like. We are not entirely sure what is going to happen with the state Supreme Court, but we are waiting with bated breath, just as you might imagine.
And for those of you guys who were wondering, like, is there a difference between the legal definition and the common saying of cruel, unusual, and corporal? And so, of course, just the basic gist. Yes, there is a difference between what is legal versus how we would use it. But of course, the layman's term is cruel being, is it causing suffering? Is it gonna, is it quick and painless, or is it, as we've seen with, even some drugs being administered, they're improperly administered. It's not the correct doses. You've seen people suffer, and so that's considered cruel. That's been a very common argument that I've seen against even lethal injection. Usual being like, I always thought that usual was more along the lines of, is this a specific punishment that's just like different than a lot of other punishments that have come through? And so the argument of, is there a timeline of where this is like, hey, everyone else has been chopping hands up to this point, so we just chop the hand because that's kind of the usual punishment, versus like there was a long break in history from this being provided. And I think that there definitely is an argument that firing squads haven't been used in quite some time, and so we've knocked out those, and then corporal being like kind of the disfiguration or the humiliation, and the idea that somebody's going to take effectively a shell to their body that is going to fragment inside of their body and cause a gaping hole in them as somehow not being disfiguring. I think it's going to be interesting to see the way that the courts play this out and how they use their legal definitions. But at least from my armchair worrying from behind the webcam, I would say that these things don't meet the threshold of not, or of satisfying not being cruel, unusual, and corporal punishments. So hopefully it errs on the side of SCADP and everyone else on our side that we will not have those punishments, that they will have to come through and figure out a new way. There's a comment in the comment section, bring back the guillotine. Absolutely not. That would not meet any of those criteria either. But no. But so from there, let's best case scenario. They outlaw the firing squads and the electric chair. Does that mean that they outlaw outright the death penalty here in South Carolina?
No. In order for the death penalty to be outlawed in South Carolina, we would need legislative action to abolish the death penalty. Now, what that would mean is that, in effect, it is, for all intents and purposes, not being used. And so there are states that have not done executions in over 10 years. And South Carolina is one of them right now. It's effectively, not practiced, but it has not been taken off of the books. And so, I'm blanking. So Oregon is one example. Right, where the governor just said, you know what, I'm going to commute everybody's sentence, where they will not be on death row anymore. They're going to be serving some version of life. I think maybe even all of them are serving life without a chance of parole. And we're going to essentially, end the death penalty in this way, but it's not officially abolished in the state of Oregon. So there are a couple of states like that, versus a place like Virginia, which did take it up recently, I believe, last year, maybe even actually it was in 2021, excuse me. They took up the topic of, ending the death penalty. And Virginia is the first the first state in the South in the death penalty. So that gives us a lot of hope, because Virginia for a long time was executing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people. So we believe that South Carolina can be there. South Carolina, there are only 8 other states that have executed more people than South Carolina. It's a lot of the states that you would think. It's Texas, it's Oklahoma, it's Alabama. These are states that, are currently using their death penalties very frequently. Alabama, not so much, because they're having some problems with their lethal injection procedure. And maybe that's a good way for us to start talking about lethal injection. Obviously, this court case is about the firing squad and the electric chair, and it's not really touching the constitutionality of the firing squad. In the United States, the practice of lethal injection has been upheld again and again and again by the Supreme Court. We, as South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, believe that all means of execution are a violation of the Eighth Amendment. All of them are cruel and unusual. All of them are bad, and we need to stop this practice and find alternatives, because, again, any alternative is better than the death penalty.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned Oklahoma, so I'm going to go ahead and plug this in the chat for everybody. I had on Natalie Bruno. We were talking about Oklahoma itself, and we were talking about sentencing reform. And during that discussion, we did talk a little bit about the death penalty there as well. So make sure that once you guys are finished watching tonight's show, of course, go ahead and refresh yourselves with Natalie Bruno. Of course, you guys know and love her from over there in Oklahoma. We talked a lot about this stuff, but I think that, you talked about SCADP being opposed to the death penalty, all versions of it being against the Eighth Amendment. But I think that there's a lot of other discussions that, having these one-on-ones with you that I've heard from you. I kind of want to just let you just lay the case out there in as many different ways as possible. How is it, what are all fire on all cylinders, if you will? Why should we remove the death penalty?
So there are lots. Let's be real. There are lots. But
Yes.
let me tell you the three big ones that we are talking about here in South Carolina. I think the most relevant ones for us as a community, as a state. First, it is a reflection of the prejudices that we have struggled with our entire existence, especially racism. So you are more likely to be sentenced to death if you are somebody with if you're also more likely to be sent to death if your victim is white, and that's kind of at large. It's very clear that our legal prioritizes the lives of white victims over Black, Latino victims, and that's disheartening, right? That's already awful, and so of the 282 people who have been sentenced to death in South Carolina, 74% of those people are Black. And so this is since 1912, which is the year that we began keeping records of our executions. That's awful. That is terrible.
Yeah.
And there are lots of cases where, there were all white jury members, the solicitor was white, the judge was white. Here in South Carolina, a case that I want to point y'all to is the case of Richard Moore. So Richard Moore is somebody who is an African American man, and he was sentenced to death in Spartanburg County. Now, he went into a convenience store, and he went in unarmed. And that's the important thing. Usually we say, or advocates of the death penalty say that the death penalty is for, the worst of the worst kind of person, right? And each of us can conjure up.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. We can all conjure up our own images, right, of what that means. If you look at Richard Moore's case, Richard Moore is not the worst of the worst. He didn't even bring a gun to the fight, which is not to say that the pain of James Mahoney and James Mahoney's family is any worse. I want to be very clear about that. And we'll get to that point in a little bit. But Richard Moore is not the worst of the worst. His case was in Spartanburg County, and at the time, the solicitor who sort of set up this case didn't complete it, but set it up, had a history of being somebody who was exhibiting racial prejudice in the courtroom, and there was a jury of 11 white people and one Latino person. So this was not a case where Richard Moore experienced being tried by a jury of his peers. So there is injustice in these ways right now. Other ways that South Carolina really ignores a lot of it, there's so much of the South Carolina that is also rooted in classism. It is people who are poor, who cannot afford adequate legal representation, who are sentenced to death. So case in point, right? Alex Murdaugh. We all kind of knew he was never going to get a death sentence, but because of the legacy of his family, he was never going to get that. And he comes from a very wealthy family, even though he himself may have squandered away all of the money and possessions and whatever, like a prodigal son. So that's what I incarcerate people who are the worst on our death penalty. We don't put them to death. We actually find people who can't defend themselves and who are often at the mercy of our own prejudices, predispositions to hurt and to hate people. One case I also want to bring to your attention is the case of George Stinney. So George Stinney, unfortunately, is the person who the youngest United States in the last century. And we have the distinct shame of being the state from which George Stinney was both from and executed in. George Stinney was from the small town of Alcolu, South Carolina. That's a county in Clarendon County near Manning. And accused of murdering children in the community. There was not a shit. He was arrested, not allowed questioned and tried and then sentenced in 83 days. None of that is legal. None of that is constitutional. This remains a mark of shame on our own records. And even when it was brought up, hey, state of South Carolina, can you rectify this? And even when there was a trial, his trial was actually vacated. He was not exonerated, as a lot of headlines say. Exoneration would mean that his family received financial restitution for the wrongs of the state, and they did not receive that. So I want to go ahead and get that record straight. Wow. South Carolina can't even apologize correctly. Yes.
That's horrible. And I know,
that's my rant.
No, that's...
Yeah. Another piece is that we also incarcerate, and this gets into the racism, classism piece, is we have a lot of people who are put on death row who have suffered extremely traumatic experiences, and they have never been able to have a way out of that and into processing their pain and into being restored into some kind of a semblance of normalcy, right? So you can look at the cases on death row and you can go through their cases and you can see that very clearly. And again, it goes into the advocacy piece of people who are hired for them or who are hired by the state who are not actually adequate in voicing those things and sharing those people's pain in a way that we can actually hear it.
Yeah, no, it's the testimony and the stories are what's really going to sell people. And then we have so many people out there that are they don't like to go to the emotional side of things. They're like, well, I just want to stand off from this, and I just they're just the worst of society, so we just need to do this. They were found guilty by a group of their peers, but they never realized typically these are people that consider themselves to be fiscally responsible or fiscally conservative or however they would like to define themselves. But I think that it's really important to note that it's cheaper to have these to have individuals incarcerated for life without chance of parole than it is to execute really any of them across the country. That's the average. Of course, South Carolina is, while they're diligent with safeguarding all of their processes or lack thereof of trying to get pharmaceuticals, they're also kind of trying to hide off how much they spend on these executions when they were and everything else. And so, they're doing their part to make sure that we get to stay in the shadows on this. But looking at the national, so it's more costly to execute somebody than to keep them alive. The cost of putting somebody on death row, even there's just a whole nother level of costs and everything else. The appeal process, the court processes, all these other things. We could have a better structured criminal justice system, saving us money on just that aspect without touching the reforms that we've touched on earlier. We could be working on this from the financial side. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to affirm everything you said. So you heard my small rant about spending $53,000 on a room where we're going to kill people, right? So that, that's likely a small amount compared to what we are probably spending, on each person on death row per year. It's likely somewhere in the millions of dollars, because they need special security because of all the legal fees and all the experts, and spending all of this money for cases and people of which 60% are going to plead out or going to get resentenced anyways. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that death penalty cases are fraught with error, whether it's evidentiary error, whether it's, error on the part of the prosecutor for withholding some evidence or some kind of malpractice. Again, 60% of death penalty cases get resentenced off of death row.
Yes.
That is a huge, anything would be better spent right?
Yeah.
Anything. It doesn't matter like what the alternative is. And this is what's going to go to my final point, right? Is that the death penalty, it is racist and classist. B, it is too costly for us. We struggle in so many other ways, and yet we're willing to spend all of this in the name of justice, in the name of victims. Now, let me tell you about victims, right? Because here's the maybe the biggest part, that people don't realize, or that maybe we don't want to talk about, is that the death penalty doesn't actually help victims. I am not here to deny the experience of victims' emotions and the experience of people being so angry and so upset that they want somebody to die. I am a chaplain um, in another vocation, and I hold people, when their loved ones are dying, right, or when some catastrophic violence happens, and I've done this in hospitals, and it is awful, and I never want anybody to experience that, and 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 what the death penalty does is it makes victims of everybody. The death penalty does not actually, it's not built to heal people from trauma. What we know actually heals people from trauma is grief counseling and trauma counseling. What we know heals people from homicide is, victims of, family members of homicide victims, is having money to pay the bills. We know it's having money to give children college tuition or school tuition. We know it is making sure that people have the community resources that they need to thrive, and the death penalty does not do that.
No.
And you can see that because there are people who years afterwards will tell you that, I thought this was going to be the end of it all. And then the next death penalty case is in the news, and it's all over again that I get these feelings of rage and anger and helplessness. And there are so many victim family member testimonies about this kind of frustration of, this sentence didn't give me the accountability that I wanted to make sure that this never happens again to another person. It did not give me the support that I actually needed. In some cases, the victim services that, are financial in nature, or maybe the counseling, these victim services hinged on my own personal testimony and my own personal workings with the prosecutor or the solicitor's office. And the moment that I wanted to deviate from that, the things were withdrawn. Or the moment that the case was over, those services were withdrawn. And we should not be doing that to victims.
Yeah.
Imagine what we could actually do to heal victims if we were not spending untold millions of dollars on death row and spending it on people who actually cannot heal based on their own resources in this moment. We could do so many things, and victims deserve healing. This is something that I'm extremely adamant about. One of the things that we are doing at SCADP is working to get connected to those voices, to see where the state failed to provide them help, and empower those voices to help us in the death penalty so that we can figure out alternatives that do bring healing, that do bring accountability. Those are all things that are really important to us. We care about victims. We don't just care about the people on death row. We care about victims too. And we care about the corrections officers who work with people on death row, who then have to become executioners, right? Or then suffer through the knowing of, this person is going to die, and I've helped this person live until they're going to die. We are here for death row family members who are also driven into poverty oftentimes because of the incredible costs that supporting their family member from from prison has wrought, and all of the generational trauma it has caused them. This entire system reeks of generational trauma, and it's time to stop. It's time to invest in actual healing.
Yeah, so many people kind of look from the outside and they see, the victims, or the family members of the victims, and they're like, this is going to give them closure. And from the people that I've heard of and kind of seen, it doesn't give you closure. It's like when you have like that bad breakup in high school, and so you spread a bad rumor about your ex, and it's like, did it give you closure? No. Did it do anything for you? No, it didn't do anything at all. And actually, in some ways, it hurt me, because now I've seen another life be taken. I've seen more harm be done, and like you said, there were things that were extended to me that were taken away once that closure was supposed to have happened. And so, we have so, looking at it from the wholeness of what the death penalty accomplishes, it just fractures more people's lives than fixes anything. It doesn't actually accomplish anything at all. And there are going to be people saying, that they use those extreme cases, the Dylan Roofs, we had one comment earlier about the Parkland shooter, about just the most grotesque and heinous people out there, who take it upon themselves to inflict just catastrophic harm on others. And it's like, yeah, they're absolutely terrible people. They don't need to get special dollars from us. They don't need to have these extra things from us. They shouldn't be a focal point for us, and using a catastrophic system when so many people are, especially in my audience, are advocating for a limited government. How limited is your government if your government is limited to take your life? There isn't a limit at that point. So it's just like, once they have those capabilities and those powers, and once we welcome them in for the most extreme cases, those extreme cases become the extreme cases for what they're doing. But that means that there's going to be closer and closer to the normalcy. And I'm scared of the slippery slope. I think we've already seen plenty of cases, and we've already mentioned the murder, etc., where an innocent man was being charged, sat on death row for many years, gets removed because he wasn't guilty of these things, but he still faces being a felon. He still faces that title despite not being involved at all. And so this system is just wrought with corruption and failures, abject failures, time and time again. And I think that something so permanent as the death penalty, we have to take a good hard look at it, not from just one perspective or another perspective, but from every perspective. I don't see how there's really a winning case out there for this. So I'm incredibly honored to have you on and talking about this tonight. But I love what you guys are doing over there at SCADP, and I'm, I want to help and build and grow and help change the lives with you guys. And hopefully we can, at the end of the day, see a better state here in South Carolina. But I want to give you the last couple of minutes to give your spiel. And where can fellow South Carolinians find you guys? Where can we sign up to learn more about you guys, engage, and everything else?
Yeah, you can sign up to our newsletter. So you can find us by going to www.scadp.org. And if you want to go to our website and you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can certainly click the tab, or you can just go to www.scadp.org/newsletter. And there you can go ahead and sign up for all of our upcoming petitions, all of the information emails. We also have different programs that we will be having later on this year. We have a virtual book club. We also have a movie night that's going to be scheduled. We're very excited about that. It's going to be a short film on the life of George Stinney. It's called 83 Days, and this is it's a film that's won lots of different awards. You are free to Google it, and we've got one of the writers and producers who is going to be in a panel with us. And I look forward to doing more in-person speaking events. Obviously, we're free and available to come back onto The Bearded Truth and be in connection with Muddied Waters Media. And yeah, I think we're speaking to, a sort of limited government sense, right? If we don't trust the government to deliver our mail on time or properly,
Woo!
then
Woo!
maybe we should rethink wanting to have the death penalty. Rethink wanting to trust the government to execute somebody in a way that is pain-free, in a way that is not cruel and unusual, in a way that actually does justice. Because, as you said, 1 in 9 executions has something that is very wrong with the case. And if that was airplanes, my friend, we would not fly. We would have every airplane down on the ground until we could figure out what is going on. So let's be mindful of these things. And if
Yeah.
you're interested in learning more about this conversation, we are a wealth of knowledge and we can connect you to lots of people. You mentioned Florida as a place where, there are discussions about the Parkland shooter. That is also a case where, there were enough people in this jury to stop him from getting an execution and getting a death sentence because there were enough mitigating factors in their eyes, Nicholas Cruz, that they said he does not deserve a death sentence. And that is striking, right? And yet, if that sentence was just a life without a chance of parole, these jury members would not have gotten into these terrible conflicts. There would not have been this intense social pressure. There would not have been this kind of harm given to this jury and to these jury members who said, you know what, we don't want to have a death sentence. And you mentioned Dylan Roof. It's really important to know that Sharon Risher, who is an anti-death penalty activist, her mother was one of the people who was killed at Mother Emanuel, Miss Ethel Lance. And so here is, the worst mass shooting in South Carolina history, one that is clearly racist and awful. And yet one of the people who is most vocal against executions is a murder victim family member from this particular shooting and wants Dylan Roof to live and not be executed. It's worth
That's
thinking
powerful.
about all of that. And you can look at the other news articles about other people who've been affected by the death penalty in a negative way, both physically and emotionally and mentally. You can find all of that on our website. We look forward to connecting with you later. So thank you so much again for having us on, Jason.
Thank you so much for being here, Hillary.
Oh, and you can find
Yeah,
us on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find us at SCA Death Penalty. Those are our handles.
perfect. Glad you got those plugs in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Hillary. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to engaging with you guys further in any way that I can. We have an incredible common vision of fixing the criminal justice system, ending the death penalty, and helping victims out. I think that these are incredible, credible goals, and I think that together we can all accomplish this. So I'm excited for it. I appreciate it so much for you coming on tonight. I will talk to you here in a few.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. What an incredible guest. Hillary is absolutely incredible, and you can see, if you guys have not already, head on over to SCADP.org. Check them out, sign up, be a part of this. We are going to change here in South Carolina. Even if you guys aren't in South Carolina, sign up over there, get the newsletter, find out what they're doing, figure out what they're engaging with. I will try to go to as many events and everything else that I can go to, of course. But we can bring that across the states, right? There's not many states that have fully outlawed the death penalty there. So you guys may be having opportunities where you guys can be the ringleader and make some differences in your own areas. So sign up, join up with them, and I'm going to be a part of that. So I'm excited for that. But I just want to say thank you guys so much. I hope you guys had a fantastic New Year thus far. I know that I had some comments that I had to address from last year, and so there was somebody who wanted me to mention Dick Van Dyke and Bob Barker. I don't know the reason for that, but he definitely will. Mr. Kenny, that's for you. It better not be a Betty White thing. It probably is a Betty White thing, but it's been mentioned. It's been there. But I hope you guys have been enjoying your new year. Hopefully it's been a hell of a lot better than mine. Mine's been on the struggle bus. I'm looking for the fine print to see what the return policy is on 2023. So hopefully you guys have had a much better year than I have. But come back next week. Another great week here on Muddy Waters Media. We're going to see Matt Wright back on Tuesday night for Muddy Waters of Freedom. And of course, we'll be back here Friday night for Mr. America, the Bearded Truth. I hope you guys will be good, be well. See you guys soon.